The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in October 1873, its wax seal bearing the impression of a rampant eagle clutching a crown. Our watchmaker, let us observe him closely now, sat hunched over a pocket watch mechanism no larger than a walnut, his magnifying loupe casting a perfect circle of autumn light onto brass gears that caught and released with the precision of a lover's promise. He almost didn't hear the knock. The workshop occupied a narrow building on Zimmerstrasse, where the craftsmen's quarter of Berlin pressed against the newer industrial districts like an old man shouldering through a crowd of youngsters. Through his second-floor window, the watchmaker could see chimney smoke rising from the locomotive works, that great temple of modern time, where schedules ruled and punctuality had become a new religion. How different from his world of patient adjustments, where a single screw might take an hour to seat properly. "From the von Steinberg estate," the messenger boy announced, already backing toward the door. The watchmaker knew that name. Who in Prussia didn't? Old nobility, the kind that traced their lineage back to the Teutonic Knights, or so they claimed. He broke the seal with his smallest screwdriver, a habit that would have horrified the baron who sent it, though our craftsmen thought nothing of it. Tools were tools. The commission was written in that careful script they taught at universities, all loops and flourishes that took 3 times as long to write as necessary. But the substance was clear. Repair and adjust the great astronomical clock in the Manor's hall. Duration of work unknown. Compensation generous. Immediate attendance requested. Now, you must understand something about our watchmaker. At 42, he had reached that comfortable middle age where reputation meant more than ambition. His guild certification hung on the wall between a portrait of his late wife, dead these 8 years from the consumption, and a calendar from the Berlin Astronomical Society. He could have refused, should have, perhaps, given what he'd heard about that particular clock. But October's rent was due, and winter coal would need purchasing. And there was something else, something he wouldn't admit even to himself. Curiosity. That fatal flaw of every craftsman worth his salt. The train journey took 3 hours, though it covered barely 15 kilometers. Such was progress in the new Germany, everything connected by iron rails that ran on schedules precise to the minute, yet still somehow always late. Our watchmaker sat in 3rd class, his tool case between his feet, watching the city give way to harvested fields where peasants still worked as their grandfathers had, backs bent to the eternal rhythm of seasons rather than seconds. At the provincial station, a carriage waited. Not the grand Baroque affair you might imagine, but a practical conveyance with the von Steinberg arms painted on the door in fading gold. The driver, a man whose face had been weathered by 50 winters, said only, "You're the clockman, then?" Not a question. The estate revealed itself slowly through an avenue of lime trees. Their leaves turned the color of old brass. First the outbuildings, then the gardens, geometric in that French style that had been fashionable a century ago, and finally the manor itself. Gothic revival, our watchmaker noted with professional interest. Everything pointed upward, the turrets, the arched windows, the grotesques leering from the corners. Time itself seemed to slow here, as if the modern world stopped at the iron gates. Klaus Hoffmann met him at the servants' entrance, a deliberate slight, though the watchmaker took no offense. He understood hierarchy as well as he understood gear ratios. Hoffmann stood like a man who'd learned to stand from a military manual, straight, rigid, every button fastened. 52 years old, our narrator estimates, with that particular combination of deference upward and severity downward that marked the perfect estate manager. "The family is in mourning," Hoffman announced, as if our watchmaker might have forgotten that Baron Wilhelm had died just last month. "You'll work quietly, efficiently. The Baroness will see you when she chooses." The tour through the manor was brief but revealing. Portraits of von Steinbergs going back 3 centuries watched from the walls, their eyes following with that painted persistence that suggested they knew something you didn't. The servants moved like shadows, quick, silent, barely there. Our watchmaker noticed how they avoided his gaze, except for one kitchen maid, who stared at him with eyes wide as clock faces before ducking back into the scullery. And then, the clock itself. It stood in the great hall, like an architectural feature that had learned to tell time. 7 feet tall, carved from black forest oak that had darkened over the decades to the color of midnight. The face was a masterwork of complication. Not merely hours and minutes, but moon phases, zodiacal positions, saints' days, even a small automaton of death that emerged on the hour to strike a silver bell with his scythe. Built in 1792, according to the brass plate, by Gottfried Lange of Augsburg. It stopped the day the Baron died, Hoffman said. And there was something in his voice. Fear, satisfaction. 1 hour before, to be precise, as it always does. The watchmaker approached slowly, the way you might approach a nervous horse. His trained eye catalogued the obvious, dust on the case but not on the mechanism visible through the glass panels, suggesting recent cleaning. The hands frozen at 11 minutes past 4. The silence where there should be ticking, not the absence of sound, but the presence of stopped time. "I'll need privacy to work," he said finally, "and access to my quarters. Where am I staying?" The room they gave him was in the servants' wing, small but clean, with a narrow window that looked out onto the kitchen gardens. As he unpacked his tools that evening, the precious loops and gauges, the tiny screwdrivers and picks that were extensions of his fingers, he could hear the servants gathering for their supper below. Their voices rose through the floorboards, indistinct but animated. Later, much later, when the house had settled into its nighttime rhythms, our watchmaker lay awake thinking about that clock. He'd seen hundreds of timepieces in his career, from simple pocket watches to the great cathedral clocks of Cologne. But this one felt different. It wasn't just the reputation, the 3 documented times it had stopped before family deaths. It was something in the mechanism itself, something his fingers had detected in that brief examination. The clock had been modified, recently, by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Morning arrived with the peculiar quality of light that October brings to Prussia. Thin, silver, already carrying winter's promise. Our watchmaker rose at 6, as was his habit, and found the servants' hall already bustling. The kitchen maid from yesterday, Anna, he learned, brought him black bread and coffee without being asked, her hands trembling slightly as she set down the cup. Strange, how fear moved through this house like a draft through old windows. The great hall stood empty when he arrived with his tools, the astronomical clock presiding over silence, thick as velvet. Now, in proper daylight filtered through stained glass windows, he could truly examine his patient. The case opened with well-oiled hinges, releasing the scent of old wood and machine oil. That particular perfume that spoke of centuries of careful maintenance. But here, Observe how our craftsman's fingers hesitated. Here was wrongness. The original mechanism was a symphony of 18th century engineering, each gear and lever placed with the mathematical precision of Bach's fugues. Yet someone had added to this composition. Copper wires, thin as hair, wound through the original brasswork like ivy through a garden gate. They'd been attached with modern solder, the kind that only became available in the last decade. His magnifying glass revealed tiny scratches on the original components, where modern tools had been less careful than they should have been. "Magnificent, isn't it?" The voice came from behind. Leopold von Steinberg, the younger son, stood in the doorway wearing a burgundy smoking jacket that had seen better decades. 31 years old, with the soft look of a man who'd never worked with his hands. Yet his eyes held something sharper. Intelligence, perhaps, or calculation. The watchmaker straightened slowly, his back protesting. "A masterwork, Herr Baron. Gottfried Lange was among the finest clockmakers of his generation." "Please, just Leopold. I'm not the Baron. That honor falls to my brother, Ernst." Something flickered across his features. "Tell me, have you heard the stories about our clock?" Our watchmaker had learned long ago that listening cost nothing. He nodded, returning to his examination while Leopold talked. 1865, my uncle Friedrich died of apoplexy. The clock stopped exactly 1 hour before. 1869, our cousin Wilhelm, thrown from his horse. Again, the clock stopped 60 minutes prior. 1871, great-uncle Maximilian, heart failure. The pattern never varies. Leopold moved closer, bringing with him the scent of French tobacco and something else, laudanum, perhaps. My father was merely the latest in this morbid tradition. The watchmaker's fingers found another anomaly, a tiny lever that shouldn't exist, connected to the mechanism that controlled the automaton death figure. When activated, it would freeze the entire clockwork. Ingenious, really. Diabolical, certainly. "Your mother wishes the clock repaired," he said carefully, not mentioning his discovery. "She believes the phenomenon can be fixed." Leopold laughed, a sound like crystal breaking. "My mother believes many things, that Ernst will be a worthy heir, that the estate can continue as it has for centuries, that fathers always know best about their sons' futures." He paused at the door. "Be careful, clockmaker. This house has a way of stopping more than just timepieces." Alone again, our craftsman continued his investigation with methodical patience. The wires, he counted 7 of them, disappeared into tiny holes drilled through the back of the case. Professional work, but recent. The wood shavings in the deepest grooves were still pale, not yet darkened by age. Someone had done this within the last 5 years, certainly no more than 10. The Baroness Margarethe received him that afternoon in her private study, a room dominated by portraits of stern ancestors and account ledgers that suggested the estate's finances required constant attention. At 55, she remained handsome in that austere way of Prussian nobility, her widow's weeds impeccable, her gray hair pulled back severely. Yet our watchmaker noticed the slight tremor in her left hand, the way her eyes darted to the empty chair behind the desk, her late husband's, no doubt. "I trust you understand the delicacy of your commission," she began without preamble. "The clock's peculiarity has become quite famous in society. Some consider it proof of our family's connection to darker powers. rumors. Ridiculous, of course, but such rumors affect marriage prospects, business arrangements, social standing. She poured herself water from a crystal carafe, offered him none. I want this curse, this malfunction, ended, whatever the cost. Mechanical problems have mechanical solutions, Baroness, though this particular mechanism is unusually complex. My husband believed it was supernatural. He spent his last years obsessed with family history, ancient curses, all manner of nonsense. Her voice carried bitterness like a wine carries tannins. He even consulted spiritualists, though he tried to hide it. But you're a man of science, aren't you? You understand that every effect must have a cause. Indeed he did, and the cause he was uncovering suggested something far more disturbing than any supernatural curse. That evening, Ernst von Steinberg returned from his military duties in Berlin. Where Leopold was soft, Ernst was carved from Prussian granite. 35 years of military bearing, a captain's insignia, facial scars from student dueling. He found our watchmaker still working by lamplight, the clock's intestines spread across a cloth with geometric precision. "You're wasting your time," Ernst announced. His breath suggested an intimate acquaintance with schnapps. "That clock is cursed, and curses can't be fixed with screwdrivers." The watchmaker looked up, noting the mud on Ernst's boots, fresh, local soil, though he claimed to have just arrived from Berlin. "Interesting. You don't strike me as a man who believes in curses, Herr Baron. What I believe is irrelevant. What matters is what others believe. And they believe this clock kills von Steinbergs." He picked up one of the gears, turned it in the lamplight. "Perhaps that's not entirely unfortunate. This family could use some pruning." After Ernst departed, leaving only the lingering scent of alcohol and anger, our watchmaker made a decision. He would trace those copper wires, follow them to their source. But not tonight. Tonight, he would listen to the house, learn its rhythms. Every mechanism had a pattern, whether made of brass or flesh. In the servants' hall, over beer and boiled potatoes, he heard whispers of other modifications to the estate. New gas lines installed 3 years ago, though only certain rooms received them. Telegraph wires strung to the main house, though no one seemed to know where the apparatus was kept. Modern conveniences certainly, but installed with unusual secrecy. Anna, the kitchen maid, kept glancing at him throughout the meal. Finally, as the others dispersed to their evening duties, she approached. "My grandmother worked here for 40 years, she whispered. She said the clock never stopped for deaths before 1865. Never." Whatever curse plagues this family, it's not as ancient as they claim. The copper wires haunted our watchmaker's dreams that night. Thin metallic serpents winding through clockwork labyrinths, while death's automaton grinned its carved smile. He woke before dawn on October 17th, his mind already calculating trajectories and purposes. In his experience, unusual modifications served unusual ends. By first light, he'd removed the clock's entire back panel, working with the careful patience of a surgeon. The wires, he discovered, were insulated with gutta percha, that Malaysian tree resin that had revolutionized telegraphy. Expensive stuff, difficult to obtain outside major cities. Whoever installed this had resources and connections. The path of the wires led downward through a hole drilled with precision into the floorboards. Our craftsman lay flat on the cold stone, peering through the gap with his jeweler's loupe. Below, in the shadows between floor and foundation, the copper threads continued their journey, joined by others emerging from different directions. A web, then, or perhaps a nervous system. "Finding anything interesting down there?" Greta Mueller, the head housekeeper, stood above him with an expression that mixed amusement with something harder to read. 48 years old, built like someone who'd spent decades hauling linens and wrestling with household accounts. Her keys jangled at her waist like tiny bells. He rose carefully, knees protesting. "The clock has been modified. I need to understand these modifications to properly repair it." "Modified," she said the word as if tasting it. "That's one way to put it. The Baron, the late Baron, had many enthusiasms in his final years. Modernization, he called it. Progress." Her laugh held no humor. "Progress that required workmen sworn to secrecy, and rooms we servants weren't permitted to clean." She moved closer, lowering her voice though the hall remained empty. "You seem like a sensible man. Do your work, take your payment, leave. Don't dig too deep. Some mechanisms are better left undisturbed." But digging, you see, was precisely what our watchmaker intended to do. That afternoon, while the family attended to their various occupations, Ernst reviewing estate accounts, Leopold reading French novels in the library, the Baroness corresponding with distant relations, he traced the wire's path through the manor's architecture. The trail led him to a storage room beneath the main stairs, filled with the detritus of centuries, broken furniture awaiting repair that would never come, portraits of forgotten ancestors, crates of correspondence that someone had meant to burn. Here, behind a wardrobe that hadn't been moved in decades, he found a panel in the wall that didn't quite match its surroundings. Newer wood, painted to look old. Inside, a marvel of modern engineering that would have impressed even the Berlin Telegraph Company. A switchboard of sorts with connection points labeled in neat German script. Library, master suite, blue chamber, rose chamber, and at the center a larger switch marked simply clock. Our watchmaker sat back on his heels, mind racing. This wasn't mysticism or coincidence. This was theater, elaborate and deliberate. Someone could stop the clock from any of these rooms, creating the illusion of prophecy. But who? And more importantly, why? That evening brought an unexpected invitation. Leopold requested his presence for dinner, not in the servants' hall, but in the family's private dining room. Our craftsman wore his best jacket, the black wool one he saved for guild meetings, though it looked shabby against the room's opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows on wallpaper that cost more per yard than he earned in a month. Only Leopold attended, the vast table making his solitude more pronounced. "My brother finds urgent business in the stables," he explained, gesturing for the watchmaker to sit. "And Mother takes her meals in her room since Father's passing. So we too must represent civilization tonight." The food arrived in courses: soup, fish, fowl, each accompanied by a different wine that Leopold described with the passion of a scholar. Our watchmaker ate carefully, aware of being observed, evaluated. Between the fish and the fowl, Leopold finally revealed his purpose. "I study the occult sciences," he announced, as casually as one might mention collecting stamps. "Not the charlatan nonsense of street fortune-tellers, but the genuine investigation of forces beyond our current understanding. This clock, for instance, what if its prophecies aren't mechanical, but somehow attuned to emanations from the future? The watchmaker chose his words carefully. In my experience, Herr Leopold, the future doesn't emanate. It arrives 1 second at a time, like everyone else. Leopold laughed, that crystalline sound again. How refreshingly practical. Yet you must admit the pattern is remarkable. Always 1 hour. Always family members. Always accurate. Patterns can be created as well as observed. The room's temperature seemed to drop. Leopold set down his wine glass with exaggerated care. Are you suggesting someone in this house is a murderer? I'm suggesting that clocks are machines, and machines do what they're designed to do. Their eyes met across the table's expanse. Leopold smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Then I eagerly await your diagnosis of our clock's design, though I wonder, if someone were orchestrating these deaths, wouldn't they need medical knowledge, access to the victims, the ability to predict or perhaps ensure a specific time of death? The implications hung between them like another course waiting to be served. Our watchmaker understood he was being either warned or threatened, possibly both. Later, returning to his room through the servants' corridors, he encountered Anna carrying fresh linens. She glanced around nervously before speaking. There's something you should know about the betting. Betting? The servants. We have a pool on who'll die next. It's horrible, I know. But when you live with death's schedule, she shrugged. Most money's on Ernst. He's the heir, stands to lose the most if the will changes. But some think it'll be Leopold. He's been strange lately, stranger than usual. Taking long walks at night, sending letters to Berlin under assumed names. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. My Johann, he works in the stables. He says someone's been taking horses out at night. Not the family, not officially. Someone who knows how to saddle a horse in darkness, ride without lanterns. The watchmaker filed this information alongside his growing collection of irregularities. That night, unable to sleep, he sat by his window watching clouds obscure and reveal the moon in turns. Somewhere in this house, someone had built an elaborate mechanism for creating death's illusion. Or perhaps, and this thought chilled him more than October wind through loose window frames, for creating death itself. The clock stood silent in the great hall below, its hands frozen at 11 minutes past 4. But our watchmaker knew that somewhere, connected by copper wires thin as hope and thick as guilt, other mechanisms were very much in motion. October 19th dawned gray as pewter, matching our watchmaker's mood as he contemplated the web of copper veins spreading through the von Steinberg estate. He'd spent the previous evening sketching what he'd discovered, creating a map that looked more like an anatomical drawing than architectural plans. The human body had arteries. This house had wires. Klaus Hoffmann found him in the Great Hall at 7, already deep in the clock's mechanism. The estate manager stood watching for a full minute before speaking, a habit that might unnerve a less focused man. You're making progress? Of a sort. The watchmaker didn't look up from the delicate escapement he was examining. This clock has been improved upon. Modern additions to an old design. The late Baron was interested in progress. Hoffmann's tone suggested personal disagreement with such interests. He read all the latest journals from Berlin, Paris, London. Corresponded with inventors, scientists, men of peculiar enthusiasms. Our craftsman's fingers found another wire, this one leading to the death automaton's scythe. When triggered, it would freeze the figure mid-swing, creating a tableau of interrupted mortality, poetic in its morbid way. Did he perform these modifications himself? The Baron? His hands were made for signing documents and holding reins, not delicate work. Hoffman moved closer, his shadow falling across the clock face. He brought in specialists, discreet men who came at night, worked behind locked doors, left before dawn. I was instructed not to inquire. The watchmaker finally looked up, meeting Hoffman's steady gaze. Here was a man who knew more than he said, which, in our craftsman's experience, described most estate managers. They survived by seeing everything and acknowledging nothing. "I'll need access to the Baron's study," he said, to understand his intentions for these modifications. Hoffman's face might have been carved from the same oak as the clock case. The Baroness has not authorized. Then perhaps you could authorize it, unofficially, as you did for those discreet specialists. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Hoffman reached for his keys. 1 hour. Touch nothing but what relates to the clock. The late Baron's study was a monument to ambitious dilettantism. Astronomical charts covered one wall, chemical apparatus cluttered a side table, and books on subjects ranging from metallurgy to mesmerism filled shelves that reached the ceiling. Our watchmaker went straight to the desk, where correspondence lay sorted into neat piles. The Baroness had been thorough in her inventory of her husband's affairs. But it was beneath the desktop, in a drawer with a false bottom, that his trained fingers detected immediately, where he found the real treasure. Letters from someone signing themselves only as MT, discussing electrical conduction, remote activation systems, and something called controlled circuit interruption. The return address was a postal box in Berlin's industrial district. More interesting still were the mechanical drawings, annotated in the Baron's spidery hand. They showed the clock, yes, but as part of a larger system. Lines spread from it like a spider's web to every major room in the house. Margin notes read, "Fear as control mechanism," and "Prophecy creates its own truth," and most chillingly, "Next activation, November." Our watchmaker was photographing these pages in his mind when footsteps in the corridor announced Hoffman's return. He closed the drawer, restored everything to its place, and was examining a treatise on planetary motion when the manager entered. "Your hour has expired, as all hours do, Herr Hoffman." Though some expire more dramatically than others. That afternoon brought an unexpected interruption. Ernst burst into the great hall, still in his riding clothes, face flushed with anger or alcohol or both. "You're wasting time, clockmaker. 3 days here, and the damn thing still doesn't run." The watchmaker set down his tools with deliberate calm. Rushing precision work ensures imprecise results. "Precision!" Ernst spat the word. "My father spent thousands of marks on precision. Modern improvements," he said. "Scientific advancement. All it brought was death and debt." He grabbed the whiskey flask from his jacket, took a long pull. "Do you know what this estate owes? What modern improvements cost?" "I imagine significantly more than my fees." Ernst laughed bitterly. "Your fees are nothing. A drop in an ocean of debt. Father mortgaged everything for his experiments. The Berlin banks own more of this estate than we do. He swayed slightly, caught himself on the clock case. Maybe the curse should take us all. End this charade of nobility. He departed as abruptly as he'd arrived, leaving our craftsmen to ponder this new information. Debt changed everything. It provided motive where before there had been only mystery. That evening, while the household attended to supper, the watchmaker made a disturbing discovery. Following the wires from the hidden switchboard, he found they led not just to rooms, but to specific locations within those rooms. In the library, a connection behind a bookshelf. In the blue chamber, a terminal beneath the windowsill. Each positioned where someone lying in bed or sitting in a chair might easily reach. But it was in the wine cellar where he found the most damning evidence. Behind racks of bottles dating to Napoleon's time, another control panel. This one more elaborate than the first. It included not just switches, but what appeared to be timing mechanisms. Clockwork designed to activate other clockwork. A paradox of automation. "You shouldn't be here," the voice came from the shadows. Anna emerged, carrying an empty wine bottle, but her expression suggested she hadn't come for a refill. "This is where they meet." "They?" "I don't know who exactly. Johann saw lights down here last Tuesday, heard voices. Male voices, arguing about schedules and payments." She moved closer, fear evident in her trembling hands. "The last time servants got curious about family business, they ended up dismissed without references, or worse." "Worse?" "The groom before Johann asked too many questions about midnight rides. They found him in the morning at the bottom of the quarry. Drunk, they said. Accident, they said. But Thomas never drank, not a drop." The watchmaker absorbed this information, adding it to his growing understanding of the house's true mechanism. Not just wires and switches, but fear and silence, debt and desperation. The clock upstairs was merely the visible component of a much larger, darker design. He spent the rest of the evening in his room, sketching connections both mechanical and human. The pattern was emerging, like a photograph in developing solution. Someone had built an elaborate system for controlling death's appearance, if not death itself. The question was no longer how, but who, and perhaps more importantly, who would be next? Dr. Theodore Weiss arrived at the estate on October 21st in a carriage that had seen better decades, much like the doctor himself. 60 years old, with white whiskers that belonged to an earlier age, and a medical bag that probably contained more laudanum than modern medicines. Our watchmaker observed his arrival from the hall window, noting how the old physician paused before entering, as if gathering strength for what lay within. The Baroness had summoned him for her monthly examination, but our craftsman had his own questions. He intercepted the doctor after the appointment, in the corridor outside the morning room. "Herr Doctor, might I have a word about the late Baron's health?" Weiss studied him with eyes that had seen too much death to be surprised by anything. "You're the clockmaker. I heard you were investigating our mechanical prophet. Mechanical problems require understanding their history, as do medical ones, I imagine." The doctor glanced around, then gestured toward the garden. "Walk with me. These walls have developed ears over the years." Outside, among roses preparing for winter's sleep, Weiss spoke more freely. "Wilhelm's death was not natural, whatever the official report states. Oh, the symptoms appeared natural. Cardiac arrest, sudden and complete. But there were irregularities, such as the timing, for one. A healthy man doesn't simply die at precisely 12 minutes past 4. The body doesn't work like, he gestured back toward the house, like clockwork. There's also the matter of the pupils. Extremely dilated, more than heart failure would cause. Our watchmaker kept his expression neutral, though his mind raced. Poison? Possibly. There are substances, digitalis in the wrong dose, certain alkaloids, that could produce such effects. But without proper examination, which the family refused, Weiss shrugged. The dead keep their secrets, and the living keep their positions. The previous deaths, were you present for those? The doctor's pace slowed. Friedrich in 65, yes. Horse accident, they said, though the horse was calm as milk when found. Wilhelm in 69 fell from his mount during a hunt. I was in Berlin. Maximilian in 71, I examined him. Heart failure. But again, those pupils. Always the dilated pupils. They'd reached the estate's small graveyard, where von Steinbergs rested beneath elaborate monuments to their own importance. The latest edition, still lacking moss and lichen, bore Baron Wilhelm's name and dates. Our watchmaker noticed fresh flowers, not the Baroness's formal arrangement, but simple wildflowers tied with kitchen string. The servants still mourn him, Weiss observed. He was not unkind, merely distracted by his enthusiasms. This business with the clock became an obsession. He truly believed someone was using it to murder his family. And you? What do you believe? The old doctor was quiet for a long moment, watching clouds gather on the horizon. I believe that when men play God, they sometimes succeed. And success in such matters is more terrible than failure. That evening, our watchmaker made a systematic study of the 3 previous deaths, using information gleaned from household records Greta reluctantly provided. The pattern, once seen, couldn't be unseen. Friedrich's death in 1865 had made Wilhelm, then second in line, the direct heir. Wilhelm's death in 1869 had eliminated a cousin with claims to certain profitable estates. Maximilian, in 1871, had been negotiating to sell his portion of family holdings to Prussian industrialists, a sale that would have diminished the main estate's power. Each death had prevented a disadvantageous change. Each had benefited the main family line. And each had been preceded by that theatrical touch, the stopped clock, the mechanical prophecy that transformed murder into fate. Our craftsman was documenting these connections when Leopold appeared in his doorway carrying a bottle of French brandy and 2 glasses. You look like a man in need of fortification. I don't drink while working. Admirable. But the sun has set, your tools are put away, and I have information you might find valuable. Leopold entered without invitation, settling into the room's single chair with practiced ease. Besides, drinking alone makes me maudlin, and Mother disapproves of maudlin. He poured 2 glasses despite the watchmaker's protests, then raised his in mock salute. To time, that great leveler of men and ruins of plans. The brandy was excellent, probably worth more than our craftsman earned in a month. Leopold savored his before continuing. I know what you've found. The wires, the switches, the whole elaborate puppet show. Father showed me shortly before his death. This confession hung in the air like incense. The watchmaker waited, understanding that silence often extracted more than questions. He was terrified, Leopold continued, convinced that someone had turned his own mechanism against him. You see, he'd installed it all after Uncle Friedrich's death. That one was genuine, a stroke while riding. But father saw opportunity in tragedy. Create the appearance of a curse, he reasoned, and you could control the family through fear. But someone else learned to pull the strings. Leopold's laugh was bitter as winter wine. Precisely. Father received a note the day before he died. The clock will stop at 4:11 tomorrow. Make your peace. He showed it to me, begged me to help him discover the perpetrator, but before we could act, he gestured helplessly. Why didn't you report this to the authorities? Report what? That my father built an elaborate system for faking supernatural murders and someone used it to actually murder him? The scandal would destroy us. Mother would never survive it. The estate would be seized by creditors. Leopold refilled his glass. So I hired you through Mother, hoping you'd uncover what I couldn't. The watchmaker considered this carefully. Leopold was either remarkably honest or remarkably clever at appearing so. Who else knew about the mechanism? That's the beautiful horror of it. Father was so secretive, so paranoid about his secret being discovered, that he told almost no one. The workman who installed it came from Berlin, never saw the complete system. Only Father knew how all the pieces fit together. Yet someone learned. Someone always learns. Secrets in houses like this are like water in winter. They find every crack, exploit every weakness. Leopold stood, swaying slightly. I'll tell you this, clockmaker. Whoever controls that mechanism now, they're not finished. Father's death was just the beginning. After Leopold departed, our watchmaker sat in darkness, parsing truth from performance. The younger son had revealed much, perhaps too much. In his experience, men who appeared drunk often weren't, and men who claimed ignorance often knew everything. He pulled out his sketches, adding new connections. The pattern was almost complete now, a web of motive and opportunity converging on a single point. But identifying the spider required more than deduction. It required proof. Tomorrow, he decided, he would set a trap of his own. The morning of October 23rd brought frost to the windows and revelation to our watchmaker's investigation. He'd spent the night creating false repairs to the clock mechanism, subtle adjustments that would reveal if anyone attempted to activate the stopping mechanism. Tiny bells from his personal kit, too small to hear unless you knew to listen, now decorated crucial connection points. Anyone trying to stop the clock would announce themselves. In the servants' hall at breakfast, the atmosphere crackled with unspoken tension. Anna sat with her young man, Johann the undergardener, their heads bent together in whispered conference. Greta Mueller presided over the morning meal with her usual stern efficiency, but our craftsman noticed how her eyes kept darting to the door, as if expecting unwelcome news. "There's talk of selling the eastern fields," announced Helmut, one of the older footmen. "Heard Herr Hoffmann discussing it with the Baroness. Needs to raise funds quickly, she does." "Selling land that's been in the family 300 years, Greta said, her disapproval sharp as vinegar. The late Baron would turn in his grave. "The late Baron's what put them in this position," Johann said boldly, then colored as everyone stared. "Well, it's true. All that modern equipment, those specialists from Berlin, estates bled dry." Our watchmaker filed this information carefully. Financial desperation added urgency to whatever plot was unfolding. He excused himself and made his way to the clock, but was intercepted by Klaus Hoffmann in the corridor. "I need to speak with you." The estate manager's usual composure showed cracks. "Privately." They walked to Hoffmann's office, a small room that managed to contain the paperwork of centuries, ledgers, contracts, correspondence dating back to when Prussia was just beginning to dream of empire. Hoffman closed the door, locked it, then went to his desk and withdrew a leather journal. "I've been keeping records," he began without preamble. "Unofficial ones. Of the irregularities in this house." He opened the journal, revealing pages of meticulous notes in cramped handwriting. "Financial transfers that make no sense. Purchases of materials never used for stated purposes. Payments to individuals who don't appear to exist." The watchmaker examined the entries. Here was evidence of systematic embezzlement, but also something else: regular payments to MT in Berlin, matching the mysterious correspondent from the Baron's hidden letters. "Why show me this?" Hoffman's hands trembled slightly as he closed the journal. "Because I believe another death is planned, and this time I fear it might be someone innocent of this family's schemes." He paused, struggling with words. "Anna, the kitchen maid. She's been asking questions, noticed things she shouldn't. Yesterday I overheard someone saying she needed to be dealt with. Who? I couldn't be certain. But it was a man's voice, educated, familiar with the estate's routines." Hoffman met his eyes directly. "I've served this family 30 years. I've kept their secrets, managed their decline, tolerated their excesses. But I won't be party to murdering an innocent girl." Our craftsman weighed this confession. Hoffman had much to lose by revealing this information, which suggested either genuine concern or a deeper game. "What do you want from me?" "Stop it. Whatever's going to happen, prevent it. You understand the mechanism better than anyone. Understanding and controlling are different things. Then we must try something else." Hoffman went to his window, gazing out at the estate's faded grandeur. "Tonight the family dines together, a rare occurrence these days. The Baroness insists something about maintaining appearances for visiting creditors tomorrow. Everyone will be occupied for at least 2 hours. "You're suggesting?" "I'm suggesting nothing. I'm simply observing that the wine cellar will be unguarded, as will certain other areas of interest." Hoffman turned back. "I'll ensure Anna serves at dinner, keeps her visible and safe. What you do with that time is your business." That afternoon, our watchmaker made his preparations with methodical care. He created a detailed map of the wire system, marking every switch and connection. He prepared his tools, not just for repair, but for careful sabotage. And he wrote a letter, sealed it, gave it to Johann with instructions to deliver it to Dr. Weiss if he didn't appear for breakfast tomorrow. The family dinner began at 7 precisely. From his window, the watchmaker watched carriages arrive, local creditors, a few minor nobility, the facade of prosperity desperately maintained. He waited another 15 minutes, then made his way to the wine cellar. The secondary control panel remained where he'd found it, but now he examined it with full attention. The timing mechanisms were remarkable. Swiss precision combined with Prussian engineering. Set correctly, they could trigger the clock stopping mechanism at any predetermined time. Create an alibi while establishing a prophecy. But there was more. Additional wires led from this panel deeper into the cellar, toward the old foundation. Following them by lamplight, our craftsman discovered a hidden room, probably forgotten by all but the oldest architectural plans. Inside, a chemistry laboratory that would have impressed a university professor. Bottles of digitalis extract, prussic acid, compounds he didn't recognize but whose purpose he could guess. Here was the rest of the equation, not just the theatrical stopping of clocks,
but the practical stopping of hearts. Fascinating, isn't it? The watchmaker spun around. Leopold stood in the doorway, but something had changed. Gone was the dilettante's lazy posture, replaced by something sharper, more dangerous.
He held a revolver with the casual competence of someone who knew its use. "I wondered when you'd find this. Father never did, too convinced of his own cleverness to imagine someone might improve upon his design." Leopold entered the room, keeping the weapon trained steadily. "You've been remarkably thorough, clockmaker. Too thorough." "So it was you, was it?" Leopold smiled. "Or am I simply another mechanism in someone else's design? That's the beautiful horror of complex systems. Once set in motion, it becomes impossible to identify the prime mover." The watchmaker calculated distances, angles, possibilities. All came up short against a steady hand and a readied weapon. "Why tell me this?" "Because you're going to help me. Tonight, during dinner, dear brother Ernst will suffer a tragic collapse. The clock, of course, will have stopped an hour before. I've already set the timer. Mother will be devastated, but will inherit everything as his will hasn't been updated since father's death. And I, the devoted son, will help her manage the estate. And if I refuse, then Anna has a tragic accident on the cellar stairs. Servants are so careless with lamp oil. Such a shame, so young, so curious about things that didn't concern her." Our watchmaker felt the trap closing, precision engineered as any clockwork. But like all mechanisms, this one had tolerances, points of potential failure. He just needed to identify them. "I'll need access to the clock mechanism," he said slowly, "to ensure it stops at the precise moment." Leopold's smile widened. "Of course, we'll go together. After all, I'd hate for you to accidentally repair something I need broken." Leopold kept the revolver steady as they ascended from the cellar, our watchmaker leading the way through shadows that seemed denser than usual. The dinner party's distant voices filtered through the walls, laughter forced as starched collars, the clink of crystal that couldn't quite mask the sound of desperation. October 25th, and the estate was performing its last waltz before bankruptcy's dawn. In the great hall, the clock loomed like a judge about to pronounce sentence. Leopold gestured with his weapon. "Show me these little bells you've added." "Yes, I know about them. You're not the only one who understands mechanical subtlety." Our craftsman opened the case slowly, revealing his modifications. The tiny bells gleamed in the lamplight, delicate as infants' teeth. "You've been watching me work." "Every day." Through the portrait eyes, Father had them modified during his paranoid phase, drilled pupils that provide quite adequate viewing angles. Leopold checked his pocket watch. 8:23. Ernst will collapse at 9:45. The clock must stop at 8:45, precisely. The watchmaker's fingers moved across the mechanism, making adjustments that appeared reluctant, but were actually precise. Each movement had purpose beyond Leopold's understanding. "This requires delicacy. If I damage the original mechanism..." "You won't. Your reputation precedes you, clockmaker. 42 years of perfect work. Though I wonder what your guild would think, knowing you helped murder a baron. Under duress." "Ah, yes, duress. That wonderful word that absolves so much." Leopold moved closer, the gun's barrel cold against our craftsman's temple. "My father used the same excuse when he built this system. Duress of debt, of maintaining appearance, of family legacy. We're all under duress, really. The only question is how we respond to it. The watchmaker continued his work, fingers steady despite the weapon's presence. He could feel Leopold's breath, smell the French tobacco and nervous sweat. A man approaching his moment of triumph, yet wound tight as a mainspring. Your father suspected you, didn't he? That's why he showed you the mechanism. To warn you, he knew. Leopold's laugh was sharp. Father suspected everyone. Ernst, of wanting the title too much. Mother, of poisoning his meals. Me, of being too weak to matter. The irony is delicious. He built this elaborate system to control us through fear, never realizing one of us would learn to use it better than he did. One of you? Or someone else entirely? The gun pressed harder. What do you mean? MT in Berlin, the mysterious correspondent, the one who provided the electrical knowledge, the chemical formulas. You're not the puppeteer, Leopold. You're just another marionette who thinks he's cut his strings. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Leopold's features. You're trying to confuse me. Am I? Then why did Ernst return early from Berlin? Why has your mother been selling jewels privately for months? Why did Hoffman know exactly when to send me to the cellar? The watchmaker turned slowly, facing Leopold directly. You're not the only one who's been watching, listening, planning. The sound of footsteps in the corridor froze them both. Heavy, military footsteps. Ernst's voice carried through the door. Leopold, I know you're in there. Mother's wondering where you've gone. Leopold's hand trembled slightly. He should be at dinner. Should be, but isn't. Just as the clock shouldn't stop tonight, but won't. Our watchmaker smiled grimly. I disabled your timer this afternoon. Whatever you put in Ernst's wine will have to work without theatrical accompaniment. The door burst open. Ernst stood there, very much alive, very much armed with his service pistol. Behind him, Klaus Hoffmann held a lamp that threw wild shadows across the walls. But it was the third figure that made Leopold's face drain of color. Greta Müller, holding a tea service with steam rising from the pot. Hello, Herr Leopold, she said pleasantly. I've brought your evening tea, the special blend you're so fond of. Though I think you know it's not really tea, don't you? Leopold swung his revolver toward her, but Ernst was faster. The military pistol spoke once, sending Leopold's weapon spinning across the floor. Leopold clutched his bleeding hand, falling to his knees. You see, Greta continued conversationally, setting down the tray, I've been with this family 28 years. I was here when your Uncle Friedrich died. Genuinely died of natural causes. I watched your father build his horrible machine, thinking himself so clever. And I watched you learn to use it, thinking yourself cleverer still. She poured a cup of the steaming liquid, its color wrong for tea, its smell sharp with bitter almonds. Your father didn't die of your poison, Leopold. He died of mine. The same poison you've been putting in Ernst's brandy, drop by drop. Prussic acid, though you probably called it something fancier. Ernst kept his pistol trained on his brother. Greta came to me 3 weeks ago. Showed me the letters you'd hidden, the chemicals you'd stolen from Father's laboratory. We've been watching you, waiting for you to reveal yourself completely. Our watchmaker stepped back from the clock, his role in this drama suddenly unclear. You knew? All of you? Hoffman spoke for the first time. Not all, but enough. The Baroness remains ignorant. It would destroy her to know both sons are monsters. Ernst for his gambling debts that necessitated the inheritance. Leopold for his methods of securing it. "I'm not a monster," Ernst protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "No?" Greta's laugh was bitter as the poisoned tea. "You knew your father was using the clock to manipulate the family. You said nothing. You knew Leopold was planning something. You waited to see if it would benefit you. You're not a murderer, Herr Baron, but you're no innocent." Leopold, still kneeling, cradling his wounded hand, looked up with eyes that had lost all pretense. "So what now? Public trial? Scandal? The estate falls to creditors and you all lose your positions?" "No," Ernst said quietly. "Now you have an accident. The same kind of accident you planned for me. Mother inherits, I manage the estate, and we salvage what we can from father's ruin." "You can't I?" Ernst's smile was cold as winter iron. "Who will stop me? Our clockmaker here? He's seen too much to risk his reputation. Greta? She's been protecting this family longer than you've been alive. Hoffman? He knows which side his bread is buttered on." The watchmaker felt the trap closing again, but this time he was merely a witness, not a victim. These people had orchestrated their own justice, brutal and efficient as any mechanism. "Actually," he said quietly, "there is another option." Everyone turned to him. He continued working on the clock, making final adjustments as he spoke. "Leopold goes to a sanatorium for his nerves, his delusions about curses and murders. Switzerland, perhaps. Somewhere distant and discreet. The estate sells what it must, keeps what it can. The clock returns to its original function, telling time, nothing more." "Why would we trust him in a sanatorium?" Ernst demanded. "Because," our craftsman turned from the clock, which had begun ticking for the first time in weeks. "The alternative is that letter I wrote this afternoon reaches Dr. Weiss. He's not as naive as you think. He's been documenting suspicious deaths among the nobility for years. One word from me, and investigators from Berlin arrive within days." The room fell silent, except for the clock's steady ticking. Time moving forward again, second by second, as it was meant to. The confession came in pieces, like a clock disassembled on a workbench. Leopold, his hand bandaged by Dr. Weiss, who'd been summoned on pretense of a minor accident, sat in his father's study on October 27th, while our watchmaker, Ernst, Hoffman, and Greta formed an unlikely tribunal. The Baroness had been given laudanum for her nerves, told only that Leopold had suffered a breakdown. "It started as curiosity," Leopold began, his voice hollow as an empty bell tower. "Father showed me the mechanism, proud of his cleverness. He'd used it twice, for cousin Wilhelm and great-uncle Maximilian. Small doses of digitalis in their wine, then the theatrical clock stopping to make it seem predestined." Ernst poured himself brandy with a steady hand, though our watchmaker noticed he checked the color twice before drinking. "So you decided to improve upon his design?" "I decided to survive." Leopold's eyes flickered with old rage. "Do you know what Father told me that last week? He was changing his will. Everything to you, dear brother. Nothing for the disappointment who read books instead of riding horses, who preferred chemistry to cavalry charges." The watchmaker continued cleaning his tools, a methodical process that helped him think. Each revelation fit into the pattern he'd been assembling, but gaps remain. The letters from MT in Berlin.
Who were they? Leopold laughed bitterly. Martin Tesler, a chemist I met at university. Brilliant, but unscrupulous. He provided the improved formulas, the electrical modifications. In exchange, I promised him a position once I inherited. Managing the estate's modernization, he called it. Where is he now? Hoffman asked. Dead. Prussic acid in his own laboratory, 3 days after Father died. An accident, the Berlin police declared. Though we both know better, don't we, Greta? The housekeeper's expression remained carved granite. I know nothing about deaths in Berlin. But our watchmaker heard the careful phrasing, the admission hidden in denial. Greta had protected this family with more than just silence. You've been controlling more than anyone realized. The servants' betting pool, you organized it to monitor who suspected what.
The ghost lights before deaths. You moving through the house at night. She met his gaze steadily. 28 years I've served this family. I've seen them at their best and worst. When the Baron started his evil game, I thought it would end with him. When I realized Leopold had learned the secret, I prepared my own contingencies. Including murder? Ernst's voice held no judgment, only curiosity. Including justice? The chemist in Berlin would have continued selling death to whoever paid. The world is better without him. Dr. Weiss, who'd remained silent throughout these revelations, finally spoke. This cannot continue. This house has become a charnel ground of secrets. The clock may tell time again, but what of the future? What prevents the next generation from learning these same terrible lessons? Our watchmaker stood, walked to the window. October rain had begun, turning the grounds into a watercolor of gray and brown. Destroy it all. The wires, the mechanisms, the laboratory. Remove the temptation entirely. And the clock? Leopold asked. The clock stays, but restored completely to its original state. Let it be what Gottfried Lange intended, a masterpiece of engineering. Nothing more or less. Ernst nodded slowly. We'll need help. Discreet workers to remove the modifications without raising questions. I know men in Berlin, the watchmaker offered. Craftsmen who understand both machinery and silence. They'll come at night, work quickly, leave no trace. The discussion continued into the evening, each participant adding their piece to the plan. Leopold would leave for Switzerland within the week, accompanied by a doctor who specialized in nervous disorders. The official story? Exhaustion from grief requiring extended treatment. The estate would sell its eastern holdings to cover debts, but retain enough to survive. As for the servants who knew too much, Anna and Johann would receive dowries and references to start their lives elsewhere. Others would be given bonuses for their continued discretion. The betting pool would be discovered and disbanded with appropriate shock from the family. There's still the matter of my payment, our watchmaker mentioned, almost apologetically. Ernst laughed, the first genuine sound of mirth heard in the house for weeks. Name your price, clockmaker, you've earned it. But the watchmaker had already calculated his fee, not in marks, but in materials. The copper wire from the modifications, all of it, cleaned and coiled. It'll fetch good prices in Berlin's electrical industries. That's all? Hoffman seemed surprised. That and something else. The watchmaker turned to Greta. The poisoned tea you brought for Leopold. You didn't intend to use it, did you? It was theater, like the stopped clock. Greta's stern expression softened slightly. You're observant. Yes, It was colored water with almond extract. I'm many things, but I'm no poisoner. Yet you let everyone believe you capable of it. Fear is a tool, clockmaker. Sometimes the only tool we servants have against our masters. She stood, gathering the tea service. But you're right. Theater. All of it. Even Leopold's breakdown, half real, half performed. We're all actors here, playing roles we've inherited or chosen. That night, alone in his room, our watchmaker reflected on the strange trial he'd witnessed. Justice had been served after a fashion, though no court would recognize it. The guilty were punished, the innocent protected, the family preserved despite its rot. Was this wisdom or merely pragmatism? He thought of his late wife, how she'd always said his greatest flaw was seeing people as mechanisms to be understood rather than souls to be saved. Perhaps she was right. But mechanisms could be repaired, adjusted, made to run true again. Souls were beyond his expertise. A knock interrupted his musings. Anna stood at the door, tears streaming down her face. "A herd to be sent away, with Johann. Greta says it's for our own good, but you'll miss the only home you've known," the watchmaker finished gently. "Change is frightening, even when it brings freedom." "Is that what this is? Freedom?" He considered carefully. "It's opportunity. What you make of it determines whether it becomes freedom or just another kind of servitude." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "The clock's running again. I can hear it from the kitchen, steady as heartbeat." "As it should be. Time doesn't stop for anyone, whatever we might pretend." After she left, our watchmaker began packing his tools. Tomorrow, trusted men would arrive to begin the dismantling. By November, the von Steinberg estate would be just another minor noble house struggling with modern times, its dark mechanism forgotten. But tonight, the clock ticked on, marking seconds with indifferent precision, measuring out the lives of those who thought they could master time itself. October 28th brought workers from Berlin, 3 men with closed faces and skilled hands who asked no questions about the unusual modifications they were hired to remove. Our watchmaker supervised their efforts, ensuring every wire was extracted, every hole properly sealed, every trace of the murderous mechanism erased. The house seemed to exhale as the copper veins were pulled from its walls, like a patient finally freed from parasitic infection. Leopold's departure that morning had been quietly orchestrated. Dr. Weiss accompanied him to the carriage, along with a nurse from Berlin who specialized in nervous conditions. The younger son looked diminished, aged a decade in 3 days, his hands trembling with something more than his wounded finger. He stopped at the carriage door, turned back to where Ernst stood on the steps. "I wonder," Leopold said softly, "if Father felt this hollow when he built his machine, if he knew he was damning himself." Ernst's face remained stone. Father never had enough conscience for damnation. "Go, Leopold. Find whatever peace Switzerland can offer." The Baroness watched from her window, a specter in black bombazine, still believing her younger son simply needed rest. Our watchmaker observed this tableau of family dissolution and wondered if ignorance might be the greatest mercy any of them could offer her. In the wine cellar, Hoffman oversaw the destruction of the laboratory. Each bottle of poison was catalogued, then carefully destroyed according to Dr. Weiss's instructions. The electrical equipment would be sold to the university in Berlin, its origins obscured by paperwork that suggested the late Baron had been a patron of scientific research. True enough, in its terrible way. 30 years of service, Hoffman said, watching blue flames consume Leopold's notebooks. I've seen this family rise and fall like the tides, but this is the lowest ebb. The watchmaker continued coiling copper wire, each length a small fortune in the booming electrical industry. Perhaps low tide reveals what high tide conceals. Now you can build on firmer ground. Can we? The debt remains. The reputation, once word spreads, and word always spreads, will be tainted. The Baroness is fragile. Ernst is... Hoffman paused, searching for words. Ernst is what his father made him. Calculating, cold, willing to sacrifice anything for the estate's survival. Yet he stayed his hand when he could have let Leopold poison him. That suggests some principle remains. Hoffman laughed grimly. Or suggests he knew Greta was watching, protecting the family from itself, as always. That afternoon, Anna and Johann departed in a hired carriage, their few possessions supplemented by a surprisingly generous dowry from the Baroness's private funds, arranged by Greta, naturally. Anna had pressed a small bundle into our watchmaker's hands before leaving. Fresh-baked bread wrapped in clean cloth, still warm from the oven. For your journey back to Berlin, she'd said. And thank you for seeing us as people, not just servants. The gift sat on his workbench now as he made final adjustments to the great clock. Every modification had been removed, every trace of Leopold's improvements erased. The mechanism ran as Gottfried Lange had intended, complex but honest, marking astronomical movements and seasons. The automaton death emerging hourly to remind viewers of mortality's certainty, without theatrical prophecy. Ernst found him there as shadows lengthened toward evening. The new Baron looked older, shoulders bearing weight that military training hadn't prepared him for. It runs perfectly now. Father would have hated that, the honest simplicity of it. Your father feared simplicity. It offered no advantage, no control. And yet, his complexity destroyed him. Ernst studied the clock face, its hands moving steadily toward 6 o'clock. I've been thinking about what you said, about letters to investigators. Was that truth or bluff? Our watchmaker smiled slightly. Does it matter? The threat served its purpose. Everything serves a purpose in this house. Even honesty becomes currency. Ernst pulled out an envelope, thick with banknotes. Your payment, as agreed, plus a bonus for your discretion. The watchmaker accepted it without counting. Poor form among gentlemen, even temporary ones. The wire alone will fetch enough. This seems excessive. Consider it insurance. Men who are well paid tend to stay quiet. Men who feel cheated tend to talk. Ernst moved toward the door, then paused. Tell me truthfully, could you have prevented all this? If you'd acted sooner, spoken louder? It was a question our craftsman had been avoiding, but here in the growing darkness, with only the clocks ticking for company, he faced it squarely. I could have exposed the mechanism immediately, but that would have brought investigators, scandal, the estate's certain ruin. I could have confronted Leopold privately, but he would have denied everything, or worse, accelerated his plans. I could have trusted Ernst, but how was I to know he wasn't the puppeteer? So you waited, watched. Let us reveal ourselves. Time reveals all things, Herr Baron. I simply helped it along. Ernst nodded slowly, like a clock that needs adjustment to run true. Though I wonder if we're running true now, or simply running.
Death emerged from the clock's upper chamber, his scythe striking the bell 6 times. Both men watched the automaton's mechanical precision, its painted grin unchanged by all the human drama enacted beneath it. "What will you do now?" Ernst asked.
Return to Berlin. Fix simpler mechanisms. Try to forget that every pocket watch might hide poison. Every grandfather clock might conceal murder. You won't forget. Men like us, we don't forget. We simply learn to live with what we know. Ernst extended his hand, an unusual gesture from nobility to craftsman. Thank you. Not for saving the estate or preserving our reputation. Thank you for showing us our own machinery. Even if we can't escape it, at least we can see it clearly now. The handshake was firm, brief, properly Prussian. After Ernst departed, our watchmaker made one final circuit of the clock, checking each gear, each spring, each carefully balanced component. Tomorrow, he would return to Berlin, to his small workshop where time moved simply forward, and the only deaths he witnessed were those of worn mainsprings and broken escapements. But tonight, he sat in the great hall listening to the clock's restored rhythm. Greta brought him dinner, good servants' fare, nothing fancy, and sat with him while he ate, neither speaking nor needing to. They understood each other, these two, who'd seen behind the mechanism's face to the human frailty driving it. "Will it happen again?" she finally asked. "Not here, necessarily, but somewhere? Another family? Another elaborate deception?" The watchmaker considered. As long as men fear death and desire control, someone will try to master time. It's our oldest ambition and our greatest folly. Then we've accomplished nothing. We've accomplished what could be accomplished. The innocent are safe. The guilty are punished or exiled. The mechanism is destroyed. That's not nothing, even if it's not everything. November 15th found our watchmaker back in his workshop on Zimmerstrasse, the events at the von Steinberg estate already taking on the quality of a half-remembered dream. Outside his window, Berlin continued its relentless transformation into a modern capital. Construction crews laying telegraph wires, the new locomotive works belching smoke into the gray sky, everywhere the sound of progress hammering against tradition. The copper wire from the estate had been sold to an electrical firm for enough marks to keep him comfortable through winter and beyond. Strange to think those delicate strands that once carried death's schedule now powered telegraph messages about stock prices and train arrivals. Perhaps that was fitting. Time and money had always been intimate companions in this new Germany. On his workbench lay a simple pocket watch, its owner due to collect it within the hour. A railway conductor's timepiece, essential for keeping the trains running on schedule. Our craftsman had replaced the mainspring, cleaned the mechanism, adjusted the balance wheel until it kept time to within seconds per day. Honest work for an honest purpose. A knock interrupted his concentration. Not the railway conductor. The knock was too hesitant, too refined. He opened the door to find Dr. Weiss, looking older than his 60 years, carrying a medical bag that seemed heavier than necessary. "Herr Clockmaker, may I come in?" They sat across from each other, the workshop's familiar chaos between them. Weiss pulled out a letter, the writing unmistakably Greta Mueller's careful hand. "She asked me to deliver this personally, said you'd understand its importance." The letter was brief, Leopold had died in Switzerland on November 10th. Heart failure, the Swiss doctors declared. Though they expressed surprise, he was young, had shown no previous symptoms. The family had been notified. Ernst was handling arrangements. The Baroness had taken to her bed with grief. Our watchmaker set down the letter slowly. Natural causes? That's what the death certificate states. Weiss met his eyes steadily.
I've learned not to question Swiss death certificates. They're remarkably thorough people.
Neither man spoke what both were thinking, that Greta's reach was longer than anyone had suspected, that her protection of the family extended beyond German borders. Justice or murder? The distinction blurred like smoke in winter air.
The estate?
The watchmaker asked.
Surviving. Ernst has proven surprisingly capable once freed from his brother's shadow. The eastern fields were sold to cover the worst debts. He's modernizing what remains, practical improvements, nothing elaborate. The Baroness believes Leopold died of grief over his father. It comforts her. And the clock? Still running, still accurate. Families come to see it now. Ernst has turned necessity into virtue, charging admission to view the famous astronomical clock. Tourism, he calls it. The future of nobility, perhaps. After Weiss departed, our watchmaker returned to the railway watch, but his mind wandered.
He thought of Leopold in some Swiss sanatorium, perhaps taking tea one afternoon. Perhaps feeling his heart skip and stutter. Perhaps understanding in those final moments that he'd never escaped the mechanism after all, just exchanged one puppeteer for another. He thought of Ernst, learning to manage an estate with the same cold precision he'd once applied to military drills. Of the Baroness, wrapped in comfortable delusions. Of Anna and Johann, somewhere starting their new life, free from the shadow of Gothic towers and family curses. Mostly, he thought of Greta Müller, still moving through that great house like a guardian spirit, adjusting the mechanism of daily life with the same patience he applied to clockwork. They were alike, the two of them, servants to time's demands, maintaining the illusion that chaos could be ordered, that entropy could be delayed if not defeated. The railway conductor arrived precisely at 4, a young man with the eager punctuality of someone new to responsibility. He examined his repaired watch with obvious pleasure, winding it carefully, holding it to his ear to hear the steady tick. "Perfect timing is essential," he said earnestly. "Lives depend on precision. 1 minute's error could mean collision, disaster." Our watchmaker nodded, taking payment, making small talk about the importance of regular maintenance. He didn't mention that perfect timing was an illusion, that even the best mechanisms gradually fell out of true. The young man would learn that soon enough. As evening approached, he prepared his simple supper, bread, cheese, beer, and ate while reading a technical manual about new escapement designs from Switzerland. Fitting reading, given the day's revelations. Outside, the city's church bells began their evening chorus, each slightly off from the others, a temporal cacophony that somehow resolved into familiar comfort. Later, much later, as he prepared for bed, he wound his own pocket watch, a simple piece, no complications, just hours and minutes marked with reliable monotony. It had been his wife's last gift before the consumption took her, inscribed on the back with words he knew by heart, "Time shared is time doubled." He'd thought it sentimental nonsense then, the kind of thing engravers put on watches for lovers. But now, after witnessing the von Steinberg family's grotesque manipulation of time, he understood better. Time wasn't meant to be controlled or stopped or used as a weapon. It was meant to be shared, experienced together, its passage marked by common moments rather than calculated murders. In his narrow bed, listening to the city's nighttime rhythms, carriages on cobblestones, distant train whistles, the occasionally drunk singer stumbling home, our watchmaker reflected on the autumn's strange adventure. He'd gone to repair a clock and discovered a mechanism for murder. He'd untangled the springs of human greed and fear, helped reset the balance of justice, however imperfectly. Tomorrow, there would be other watches to repair, other mechanisms to adjust. Simple problems with mechanical solutions. A broken mainspring here, a worn gear there. Nothing that required moral calculation or philosophical pondering. Just the honest exchange of skill for payment, time for money. Yet he knew he would never look at a stopped clock the same way again. Behind every frozen face he would wonder, accident or intention, prophecy or performance. The von Steinberg clock had taught him that time could be a stage as much as a standard, its measurement subject to human manipulation despite its cosmic indifference. The church bells struck midnight, their bronze voices carrying across the sleeping city. Somewhere in Prussia, a great astronomical clock continued its patient revolutions, marking the movements of celestial bodies with mechanical precision. Death emerged hourly to strike his bell, reminding any observers of mortality's schedule. But the clock no longer stopped for the family's convenience. It simply measured time as time insisted on being measured, relentlessly, honestly, without favor or prophecy. Our watchmaker smiled slightly in the darkness. He'd done good work at the von Steinberg estate, though not the work he'd been hired for. He'd repaired more than a clock. He'd restored time's integrity, at least in one small corner of the world. That would have to be enough. Sleep came slowly, bringing dreams of copper wires and spinning gears, of Leopold's desperate eyes and Greta's steady hands, of time flowing backward and forward simultaneously, until past and future met in a single frozen moment. But when morning came, it arrived as it always did, 1 second at a time, measured by the simple watch on his nightstand, indifferent to human schemes and divine plans alike. He rose, wound the watch, began another day in his workshop, where time moved forward with humble certainty. The astronomical clock was fixed, the mystery was solved. The family was saved or damned according to their own actions, and our watchmaker returned to his craft, a little wiser, perhaps, certainly warier, but still devoted to the simple proposition that time should be measured honestly. In the end, that was all any craftsman could offer: honest work in a dishonest world, precision in the face of chaos, the steady tick of well-maintained clockwork against the irregular heartbeat of human ambition.